Hey guys, tonight we're time traveling back about 5,000 years to a moment when the desert wind carried the scent of barley mash and record keeping meant carving numbers into wet clay. You're in the middle of Sumer, an ancient land where civilization itself was busy being invented, and math, oddly enough, was taught through beer. Yeah, beer. Imagine the warm, earthy air of a late evening in Uruk. The sun dips low, casting long shadows across dusty streets paved in sun-baked bricks. You wander through a market teeming with chatter, goat hooves, and the occasional startled goose. In the background, scribes chant numbers under their breath, styluses clicking against clay in an almost hypnotic rhythm. A vendor gestures for you to sample his cloudy brew, sloshing it into a ceramic mug with a crooked grin. But you're not here just to drink. You're here to learn how beer wasn't just the Sumerians' favorite beverage. It was also their calculator, paycheck, and if you messed up your math, your biggest headache. And you probably won't survive this journey with your dignity intact, unless you enjoy fractions in base 60 and the occasional crocodile dung poultice. Not kidding, we'll get there. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below with your location and what time it is where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start at the edge of the Euphrates River, watching muddy water ripple by as oxen trudge home and workers rinse off the day's grime. Somewhere behind a thatched wall, someone singing in a language no one speaks anymore. The scent of charcoal, grain, and just a touch of fermented funk hits your nose. It's brewing night. See, beer wasn't just part of the culture. It was the culture. The Sumerians didn't invent it, credit to their even older neighbors. But they sure took it seriously. Workers got paid in it. Soldiers marched for it. Even the gods were honored with it. And that's where the math starts. Picture a day laborer stumbling home after a shift stacking temple bricks. He's earned 2 seela of beer today. That's about a liter. But if he worked an extra half shift, the priest has to figure out what 1.5 seela looks like, without spilling any. Multiply that by dozens of workers, and you're knee-deep in math faster than you can say fermentation. You approach a woman hunched over a wide ceramic pot. She's skimming off foam and muttering numbers in Sumerian. Her job? To measure, mix, and divide the day's brew, so every worker gets the right cut, more or less. But without glass bottles, calculators, or even consistent cups, how did they do it? Enter the clay tablet. Each tablet is like a snapshot in time. One might read, 40 workers, each received 1.5 seela beer, total 60 seela. Easy, right? Until you realize this was all done using cuneiform writing. Those wedge-shaped symbols poked into clay using reed styluses, and a base 60 number system. Yep, instead of counting by tens, they use 60s. Why? Historians still argue whether it was because 60 has so many neat divisors, or because they just enjoy confusing modern historians. Let's talk about these scribes. You hear them before you see them. Kids and teenagers reciting sums, their voices echoing off adobe walls. Their school? An Adubba, or tablet house. Their teacher? A stone-faced man who hasn't smiled since the flood myth was first told. And what are they practicing? Beer math. Scribbles like, if 3 workers receive 4 seela of beer each, how many jars needed for 12 seela? It's the Sumerian version of your 3rd grade word problems, except your teacher occasionally throws an actual stick if you mess up. Among the buzzing of gnats and laughter of kids playing with broken pots, you crouch next to a young student working on his lesson. His hands are caked in drying clay. He sighs dramatically, just like you did during your own math classes, and carves out a careful. That's the symbol for 10. He presses harder, trying to correct it. Whoops, that's a 40 now. The teacher sighs too. Fun fact, we've found tablets that include corrections, crossed out mistakes, and even what might be Sumerian equivalents of try again. One even includes what looks like the symbol for donkey dung. Likely not part of the equation, but possibly a critique. Beer wasn't just for the workers. It was for priests, scribes, guards, and even children, though historians still debate whether kids got their own rations or just sips. Regardless, beer was embedded in the math, in the labor, and even in religious offerings. Gods wanted their fair share too. Imagine praying with a pint. It was basically required. As the stars appear overhead, you follow a group of scribes filing into a temple storehouse. It's cooler here, quiet. Crates of grain line the walls. Clay seals mark which batch is for brewing, which for baking, and which for sacrifices. Everything is logged. Every drop is counted. And there, tucked into a dusty niche, is a tablet worn smooth by time. It reads, roughly translated, "We delivered 60 sila. The workers received 58. The remainder unaccounted. Someone's beer went missing. Someone's math didn't add up. And somewhere in the past, a supervisor probably got a very stern look. And so did the math student who made the same mistake 4,000 years later. You're still standing in the Sumerian twilight, the buzz of the market fading behind you. Your sandals squish slightly in the mud as you wander toward a low, flat building with smoke puffing from a chimney-like hole in its roof. The smell? It's unmistakable. Earthy, sour, and warm. Someone's brewing beer again, because in this part of the world, everyone is. You duck your head and step inside the brewery. There's no stainless steel, no chill fermentation tanks. Just enormous clay vats and rows of baskets filled with sprouting barley. A woman, clearly the brewmaster, lifts her head and squints at you through the steam. She's stirring mash with a wooden paddle nearly as tall as you, and beside her, stacked neatly like mail for the gods, are dozens of beer rations wrapped in soft cloth and tied with straw. Here in Sumer, beer wasn't just a drink, it was payment. And not in the "here's a six-pack for helping me move" kind of way. It was your daily wage, your rent, your bonus for not dying on the job. Each laborer, whether building a ziggurat, digging irrigation canals, or grinding grain for temple bread, received a portion of beer as part of their compensation. It wasn't optional. It wasn't ceremonial. It was survival. Some texts suggest men received larger portions than women. Other tablets contradict that. Historians still argue whether those differences were based on job role, gender, or just bad accounting. You hear someone laugh behind you. A group of laborers have arrived, dusty and sunburned, collapsing onto mats. A scribe is seated at a small wooden table with a fresh tablet. He presses his stylus into the clay and starts his count. 1 man, 1 woman, 2 children. He glances at the brewer, who ladles out liquid portions into hand-shaped cups. She works fast but precise. 2 sila for him, 1.5 for her, half for the kids. It's math, but math in motion. And it gets more complicated fast. Because barley, the core ingredient in their beer, was also a form of money. So when you say beer wage, what you're really saying is barley currency transformed by fermentation. It's like if your boss paid you in sacks of flour, and then you had to go home and bake your own paycheck. Every single night. Now imagine trying to split that paycheck with your 4 friends while arguing over who gets what. That's where ratios came in. Let's say your team is owed 12 sila beer. There are 4 of you. Easy, 3 sila each. But what if one person did double shifts? Or was injured and only worked half the time? Now you're doing proportional math, without decimals. The Sumerians did it using unit fractions and reciprocal tables. So instead of dividing by 4, you'd multiply by the reciprocal, written out in elegant cuneiform that looked more like art than arithmetic. But that's not the weirdest part. Some beer types were stronger than others. That meant they were worth more. So workers could be paid in small beer or big beer, depending on their job or status. And yes, scribes had to track that too, calculating exchange values between strengths of brew. A tablet from Lagash records a curious case where one priest received 1 sila of strong beer equals 2 sila of weak beer. Either someone was getting a really good deal or a really bad one. Now you're standing in front of a massive storage room. Hundreds of sealed jugs line the walls. Each has a mark etched into the clay, signs denoting volume, strength, and date. You lean closer to one and see a symbol set that roughly translates to rations of strong beer, stored 3rd week, temple batch. That's Sumerian product labeling. Eat your heart out, modern barcode. Your head starts to spin with the numbers. Not from the alcohol, though you suspect even inhaling in this room might get you tipsy, but from the math. Every jug had to be tracked. every portion divided, every delivery logged. Some scribes were so good at this they became full-time beer accountants. Historians called them satamu, temple overseers who specialize in food and drink records. Imagine your whole career being dedicated to making sure no one cheated the beer math. But people still did. Records show missing quantities, discrepancies in delivery totals. One infamous clay tablet even includes a formal accusation. Sealer not received despite stamp seal. Scribe denies error. Brewmaster absent. It's an ancient HR complaint, and possibly the oldest passive-aggressive note in history. Of course, all this was subject to seasonal variation too. Barley harvest determined beer output. If the yield was low, rations dropped. People complained. And if the beer was too thin, well, there were riots. Actual riots. You picture a mob of sunburned workers shaking their fists and yelling about weak brew. Somewhere in the crowd, a math teacher sighs, grabs a stylus, and starts calculating damages. You step outside for a moment. The cool evening air welcome on your skin. The stars blink above the dusty rooftops. Somewhere nearby, a baby cries. A dog barks. And in the distance, someone sings a lullaby about beer so strong it made the gods smile. You think of all the numbers you've seen, all the tablets you've imagined, all the people long gone who once measured out the foam and counted the grains. It wasn't just math. It was meaning. It was fairness. It was survival. And you, standing here with clay dust on your hands and barley husks in your sandals, start to understand just how deep it went. You're back in the heart of the Temple District now, and the air is thick with heat and incense. Somewhere nearby, a cow lets out a long, mournful moo, and a priest chants something rhythmic and strangely soothing. But your attention is fixed on something far more thrilling, a clay tablet, freshly baked, still faintly warm to the touch. It's a ledger, not a dramatic one. There are no scandalous declarations, no love poems or divine edicts. Just a list, numbers, names, symbols, and tally marks. But this humble artifact is the beating heart of Sumerian bureaucracy. It's how they track their world. And today, you get a peek over a scribe's shoulder as he records the beer rations for an entire team of canal diggers. Here's what you see: rows of symbols, grouped like miniature equations. Each line represents a day. Beside it, symbols for barley, strength level, and the stylized figure for a worker. The scribe, fingers stained with clay, leans forward with the intensity of someone calculating taxes during an audit. You hear him mutter under his breath, possibly insults, possibly math, but you catch the tone, frustration, because this isn't easy. Sumerian scribes didn't have notebooks, no erasers, no copy-paste. They had clay and a stylus, and every mistake meant either scraping and rewriting while the clay was wet or starting completely over. You mess up your beer count, you lose an hour of work. Or worse, you cause a temple shortage and get called in for a very tense meeting with someone holding a big stick and very little humor. You squat beside the scribe, watching him record a delivery. 20 sela to the northern crew, for workers. Sounds simple, except each man gets a slightly different ration. The foreman gets more. The guy with the bad back gets less. One tablet even includes a note, reduced for lateness. Ouch! The scribes developed all sorts of tricks to keep things organized. Special symbols to denote approximate versus exact. Arrows to indicate transfers. Some tablets even had little grid lines scratched in by hand, a precursor to spreadsheets. And speaking of spreadsheets, you glance at a cracked tablet in the archive marked with what looks like a column header. Yep, they had those too. Ancient Excel, brought to you by Reed Stylus and Intense Eye Strain. One of the most famous tablets discovered shows an entire monthly budget in beer terms. It tracks dozens of transactions, what came in, what went out, what was stored, and what mysteriously disappeared. It's so complex. Scholars still argue whether it was an actual record or a teaching tool. Either way, it proves just how sophisticated their math had to be. Now imagine learning how to read that at age 8. That's what many young scribes did. Your view shifts to a smaller room, a sort of clay smudge classroom, where young boys sit hunched over writing boards. A teacher paces behind them, arms crossed, eyebrow raised. Each child has a soft tablet on their lap and a stylus in hand, and they're all trying to copy the same thing. If 3 workers receive 1.5 cl each, how much beer total? One boy hesitates. He scratches his head. Then, with the solemnity of a monk, he presses the stylus into the clay. That's 4.5. It's correct, but slightly crooked. The teacher grunts approvingly and moves on. This, apparently, is a good day. But not all scribes were angels. You pass another tablet, one cracked at the edge, but still legible. It reads like the diary of a snarky student. It includes not just numbers, but notes in the margins. Old fool added wrong again, and he thinks 5 times 3 is 14. Whether these were jokes, private thoughts, or just clay-based graffiti is unclear. But it's comforting to know ancient kids were just as sassy as modern ones. You crouch beside a storage bin and pick up a slightly lopsided tablet. This one's different. It's covered in corrections. One symbol is clearly scratched out and replaced. A line has been added on the side. Someone wrote, "See above," with an arrow. You smile because this is the math equivalent of "sent the wrong file. Please ignore." What's striking is the care, the precision, the pride. Despite the occasional sass, these scribes weren't just bureaucrats. They were respected, almost sacred figures. They recorded not just beer rations, but laws, epics, prayers, treaties. In a world without phones or paper, they were the keepers of truth. And beer math? That was just the beginning. You look up at the temple entrance where 2 guards sit dozing in the heat. One clutches a half-finished jug of beer, clearly part of his daily allotment. He snores softly. You wonder if his ration was recorded correctly today, or if a sleepy scribe mistook for and accidentally gave him double. Then again, maybe that's why he's sleeping so well. As the sun dips behind the city walls, casting golden light across the ziggurat steps, you reflect on everything you've seen. The ledgers, the math, the meticulous order. A society built not just on stone and sacrifice, but on calculations and cleverness. They built a civilization one beer at a time, recorded lovingly into clay by dusty, sunburned nerds. And now you, thousands of years later, are smiling at their work, at their smudges, their shortcuts, their sideways jokes. History doesn't always roar, it whispers. In tiny triangles pressed into mud, in numbers etched beside names, in the patient math of measuring beer. The temple bells are quieted. But inside the scribal school, the soft scrape of stylus on clay continues. You find yourself drawn back into the world of those proto-math teachers, the temple scribes, who were less like the gentle tutors you might imagine, and more like the original drill sergeants of arithmetic. Picture them. Stern-faced men and sometimes women, their robes heavy with dust and ink stains, wielding their reed styluses like swords. They taught not just numbers but discipline, because messing up your calculations in ancient Sumer wasn't just embarrassing. It could mean shortages of beer-angry gods, or worse, the loss of your job or your head. The scribe's curriculum wasn't your casual 1, 2, 3. It was a rigorous boot camp of base, 60 numerals, multiplication tables carved into tablets, and abstract concepts that would give even the sharpest modern student a headache. One lesson you overhear involves multiplying 10 by 6. The teacher's voice is clipped, almost sing-song, times equals 60. Repeat. The students chant back, their voices melding into a hypnotic rhythm. These lessons were practical. They weren't teaching math for math's sake. They were preparing future accountants, administrators, and bureaucrats, the backbone of an empire that needed to track barley, labor, land, and yes, beer. But here's the quirky bit. These teachers didn't just teach straight-up arithmetic. They also used riddles and puzzles. Because even 4,000 years ago, a bit of mental gymnastics helped keep boredom at bay. One famous problem goes something like this. A man has 7 jars of beer. He gives half to his friend, then drinks one. How many jars remain? It's a straightforward riddle, but scribes often inserted clever twists to trip up their students. And speaking of students, historical records show they sometimes rebelled. We found tablets with marginal scribbles like, "The teacher is harsh," or "I hate this lesson." You can almost hear their sighs and grumbles, echoes from a time when multiplication tables were the enemy of play. Historians still argue whether these schools were open to everyone or just an elite few. Some evidence hints that girls attended, perhaps learning alongside boys, while other tablets suggest scribal education was male-dominated. One particularly cheeky tablet includes a doodle of a woman holding a stylus with the caption, "Better at math than you," which scholars take as playful, though it's not conclusive. The scribes were also responsible for preserving knowledge beyond arithmetic. They copied myths, laws, and hymns, embedding their lessons in culture as much as numbers. That's why their teaching mattered, not just for keeping the beer flowing, but for passing down the story of civilization. You pause and imagine sitting cross-legged on the dusty floor of an adubba, sun filtering through woven mats, the scent of clay and ink in the air. The teacher's stern gaze locks onto you as you struggle through a particularly gnarly fraction. Remember, this is base 60, so fractions like 1/3 or 1/5 aren't simple decimals, but awkward symbols etched painstakingly into soft clay. Frustration builds. You try to focus on the rhythmic scraping of the stylus, the chanting, the murmured encouragements. This isn't just math. It's survival training for the ancient world. And sometimes you think those stylus-wielding scribes might have been a bit sadistic, because the more complicated the beer math, the more errors and the more headaches, but also the more stories. The heat of the day lingers as you settle into a shaded corner of the adubba, watching the young students. You see them sitting cross-legged, fingers sticky with clay dust, scribbling away on small tablets with intense concentration. Their brows furrow as they wrestle with the same problems you thought impossible moments ago. This is how they learned. No chalkboards, no calculators, just a steady hand and patience. They copied problems over and over, committing multiplication tables, fractions, and beer rations to memory. There was no margin for error. Their clay tablets were permanent records. You notice a boy hesitating, his stylus hovering over the clay as he tries to figure out how to divide 5 seal of beer between 3 workers. It's tricky. Those thirds and fifths never came easy, especially in base 60. He frowns and presses down, carving the complex wedges that mean 1/3 in cuneiform. You feel his frustration because, honestly, it's the same kind of problem that once made you want to cry during math class. But school wasn't all tedious repetition. Teachers introduced clever puzzles to keep the young scribes engaged. One favorite was the beer portion challenge, where students had to calculate rations for workers who showed up late, left early, or did extra shifts. Sometimes, these challenges turn into games, with students competing to find the correct answer fastest. You catch a glimpse of a tablet where a student has scribbled a joke in the margins. If the beer runs out, blame the barley thief. Even ancient kids knew the value of humor, especially when the math got dry. While boys were the majority, historians still argue about whether girls attended these schools. Some tablets include female names and accounts, and a few fragments suggest girls learned reading and arithmetic, perhaps more in temple settings than the scribal schools themselves. One peculiar tablet even hints that girls might have had their own separate classes focused on different subjects, but no one's quite sure. Beyond teaching arithmetic, scribes were trained to be meticulous record keepers and administrators. Their job was to keep the complex web of temple economy running smoothly, tracking how much barley was stored, how much beer was brewed, and who was owed what. Mistakes could mean disaster. You remember a tablet showing a worker who tried to claim more beer than his ration. The scribe's note beside it was blunt. Claim denied. Error corrected. In other words, no freebies, no loopholes. These early math classes were demanding, often extending for years. You imagine the children enduring long days, learning to write cuneiform signs until their fingers ached. Each correct tablet was a small victory, and a step toward a career that could secure their place in society. As the afternoon sun filters through woven reed mats, you listen to the rhythmic scratching of stylus on clay and the occasional frustrated sigh. The air smells faintly of warm earth and barley husks. Somewhere nearby, a temple priest murmurs a prayer, probably hoping the math adds up this time. You lean back and let the calm wash over you, appreciating the dedication it took to learn and teach math in a world without paper or pencils, without calculators or smartphones. Here, every mark was permanent, every mistake costly, And yet, despite the challenges, the tradition of teaching math through practical, everyday problems, like dividing beer rations, ensured knowledge was passed down brick by brick, tablet by tablet. You blink, and suddenly you're staring down a peculiar beast that is the base 60-number system, the Sumerians' own brain teaser, still baffling scholars and students alike. Imagine counting not by tens like most of us, but by 60s. Why? Well, historians still argue whether it was because 60 is divisible by so many numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30, and 60 itself, making fractions easier, or simply because they inherited this system from earlier cultures. Regardless, you now have to think of numbers the way a Sumerian would. You try adding 1 and 59. Simple? Nope. In base 60, that equals 60, which rolls over to 1, 0, meaning 160 and 0 ones. So they add 2 symbols for numbers less than 60. Then a positional system a bit like ours, but with 60 instead of 10 as the base. You squint at a clay tablet with strange symbols and think, how did they even teach this stuff? It was through repetition, visual aids, and yes, beer. The scribes had tables carved out, multiplication tables for 1 through 59. So students memorized what today would feel like multiplication tables from 1 to 60. You imagine a class chanting, 1 times 1 is equal to 1. 2 times 2 is equal to 4. 30 times 2 is equal to 60. But the fun starts with fractions. Instead of decimals, the Sumerians expressed fractions as sums of unit fractions, fractions with numerator 1. So instead of 0.5, they wrote 1/2. For 0.4, they used combinations like 1/3 plus 1/15. The challenge? Representing thirds, fifths, or 7 parts. Pretty much the kind of fractions you see dividing beer into equal parts for workers. And dividing beer is no joke. Pouring exact thirds or fifths from a clay jug requires both math skill and a steady hand. You think of how frustrating that must have been. Try to explain that your friend's 1/3 share is not the same as 1/5, but with no modern measuring cups. One tablet even illustrated a problem about mixing beer strengths and quantities. Something like, if you have 10 seal of weak beer and 5 seal of strong beer, how do you divide it fairly among 3 workers? The answer isn't obvious. But the Sumerians managed. They used clever fraction tables and reciprocal numbers to make those divisions workable, even if it meant scribes spent hours poring over tiny marks on clay, correcting mistakes with a wet sponge or fresh clay patch. Sometimes their attempts went sideways. You probably heard of the famous error tablet, where the scribe miscalculated division, causing a domino effect of wrong beer rations. The teacher's margin note, don't do this again. Their number system also made multiplication and division more complicated than today's base 10 math, but it had advantages. It's believed that the Babylonians, heirs of Sumerian knowledge, developed early astronomy and timekeeping partly because of base 60's divisibility. Even today, we measure time in angles in 60s, 60 seconds in a minute, 360 degrees in a circle. So next time you glance at a clock, think of those ancient scribes hunched over tablets and beer jugs, inventing math to make the world run smoothly. You grin, realizing that this base 60 system was probably the Sumerians' way of saying, let's make math complicated enough to keep historians busy for millennia. The warm light of late afternoon filters through the lattice windows as you watch a scribe at work, carefully inscribing numbers beside the symbols for beer. Today's lesson is fractions. Specifically, how to split beer into tricky portions like thirds, fifths, and even sevenths. You feel the familiar tug of frustration creeping in, because these fractions aren't the easy decimals you learned as a kid. They're unit fractions, complex sums, and a serious challenge, especially when you're trying to keep everyone happy. Dividing beer was a real headache, literally. Pour too little and workers grumble. Too much, and the temple store runs dry. So they developed precise methods to handle these portions. Instead of decimals, they used reciprocal tables, which gave them fractions like 1/3, 1/5, and 1/7, expressed as sums of unit fractions. It sounds complicated because it was... Imagine trying to slice a single jug of beer into 5 equal parts without modern measuring tools. The scribes had to calculate these divisions and trust the brewmaster's steady hand. One famous tablet shows a math problem where a brewer has to distribute 7 seal of beer among 3 workers, with one portion deliberately reduced for lateness. The scribes' calculations painstakingly determined each share, noting the amount owed and received. You notice a margin note, possibly a teacher's correction. Be precise, no shortchanging. This math wasn't just academic. It had real consequences. If the numbers were wrong, someone might get less beer than owed, leading to disputes or even theft. Historians still argue whether temples sometimes fudge the numbers to keep more beer for themselves, but the tablets don't lie. Occasionally, the math got playful. Some tablets include puzzles that ask, if one jug is divided into parts of 1/2, 1/3, and 1/5, what is the total? It's a challenge that's still taught today in number theory classes. You watch a scribe recopy the problem onto a fresh tablet. His stylus moves swiftly, carving out unit fractions and carefully adding them. You imagine his concentration. One slip, and the entire calculation is wrong. Nearby, a teacher inspects the tablets, occasionally shaking his head at errors. You realize this is the ancient equivalent of a math teacher yelling, "Show your work." The complexity of these fractions might explain why beer math was such a serious subject. Dividing beer accurately was essential for fairness, social order, and economic stability. And so, through patience, repetition, and a lot of clay tablets, the Sumerians mastered beer fractions, one tricky portion at a time. The temple gates creak open, and you step inside the cool, shadowed courtyard where priests move with purpose. This place isn't just about worship. It's the economic nerve center of ancient Sumer. Temples were powerhouses controlling land, labor, and resources, including, unsurprisingly, vast supplies of beer. You follow a priest toward a dimly lit storeroom stacked high with sacks of barley and rows of sealed beer jugs. Tablets hang from hooks on the walls, each a record of taxes, offerings, and trades. Here, math and religion intertwined, like the braids on a ceremonial staff. Priests weren't just spiritual leaders. They were accountants, logisticians, and bureaucrats. They used math to track the flow of goods, especially beer, which was often a form of tax paid by farmers and workers. Sometimes it was delivered in barley, sometimes in liquid form. Every ration owed had to be precisely recorded. You see one tablet detailing a tax collection. 60 seah of barley, converted to 30 seah of strong beer, owed by the northern village. This conversion required careful calculation, because barley's quality and the brewing process affected how much beer produced. The priest's role included mediating disputes. Imagine a farmer arguing he paid more beer tax than recorded, or a worker claiming his ration was cut unfairly. Math was their judge and jury. Interestingly, some tablets reveal that beer was sometimes used as collateral or to pay debts, creating a complex network of transactions that required intricate bookkeeping. You overhear a priest dictating a tally. Grain stored, 120 selah. Beer brewed, 80 selah. Offerings to gods, 10 selah. Every number mattered because it represented real goods flowing through the temple's hands. Historians still debate whether this economic control helped stabilize society or concentrated power too much in the hands of the temple elite. Either way, it's clear the temple's math kept Sumer running. As you turn to leave, you spot a tablet with an unusual annotation, a scribble suggesting some rations were missing or unaccounted for. You imagine the whispered accusations behind temple doors, the slow erosion of trust, and the challenges of maintaining fairness in a system so dependent on precise numbers. You step back into the sunlight, feeling the weight of thousands of years of math and beer intertwining to build civilization. The sun is high, baking the streets as you weave through a bustling construction site. Workers haul mud bricks and lash palm fronds, sweat streaming down their faces. The foreman, clipboard in hand, well, a clay tablet and stylus, really, is busy tallying today's beer rations. You watch as he calculates how many selah of beer each worker should receive for a full day's labor. The standard is roughly 4 selah per person, but it fluctuates based on tasks completed and time spent. Those who arrive late or took breaks receive less. Every drop matters. You glimpse a tablet listing the day's distribution. 30 workers, 120 selah allotted. Actual delivered, 110 selah. There's a note, lost during transport. Beer didn't travel well. Clay jars could crack, or carriers could siphon off their shares. This daily ration math was vital. Workers depended on their beer for calories, hydration, and morale. Temples tracked it meticulously to ensure fairness and prevent theft. One tablet shows a formal complaint. Worker X received less than ration. Request adjustment. The scribe's margin note replies, reviewed and corrected. Even 4,000 years ago, disputes over pay were a thing. Calculating rations wasn't as simple as dividing total beer by the number of workers. Different roles had different allocations. Skilled laborers got more, apprentices less. The foreman's job was a delicate balancing act. You imagine the foreman, tired and sunburned, trying to keep his numbers straight while managing grumbling workers and leaky jars. Each miscalculation could spark unrest. Historians still debate how standardized these rations truly were across regions and times. Some believe local customs influence amounts, while others argue for strict temple regulation. Regardless, the math of daily beer rations was both practical and political, a tool for social order and worker satisfaction. You walk away, hearing the clink of jars and the murmur of bargaining, appreciating the ancient struggle to keep numbers balanced in a world without calculators. You're now in a quiet, shadowy corner of the temple archive, surrounded by stacks of clay tablets piled high like ancient paperwork. Here lie the relics of scribal triumphs and failures. These tablets aren't just pristine records. Many bear the scars of human error, smudges, crossed-out numbers, and impatient corrections. You pick up one with a particularly humorous note carved into margin. Scribe's mistake. Added an extra 0. Beer ration tripled by accident. Sorry, workers. The tone is almost passive-aggressive, as if the scribe was grumbling about his own slip-up. Mistakes were inevitable. After all, the math was complex, the tools unforgiving, and the stakes high. One error in a calculation could mean a temple-wide shortage or workers going thirsty. Some tablets reveal repeated errors, multiplication tables copied incorrectly, fractions misrepresented, or numbers transposed. The corrections are sometimes blunt. Wrong again. See original. You can almost hear the frustration across millennia. These slips weren't just academic. The temple elite depended on precise accounting to maintain control. A miscounted beer ration could mean angry workers, damaged reputations, or worse. But it wasn't all stern reprimands. Some tablets show scribes poking fun at themselves or colleagues, making jokes about math being harder than hauling mud bricks. You realize that behind every number was a person, sometimes tired, sometimes distracted, always human. And despite the errors, this painstaking record-keeping laid the foundation for everything from taxation to trade. You smile. Imagine the ancient equivalent of a sorry for the inconvenience, note etched in wet clay. History preserves not just successes, but the charming imperfections of its makers. The sun filters through narrow windows as you enter a smaller classroom, filled with whispers and quiet laughter. Here, the question hanging in the air isn't just about numbers. It's about who got to learn them, girls or boys, temple scribes or commoners. Historians still argue whether female students were part of formal scribal education, or their learning took different forms. Some tablets mention women by name, listing their involvement in beer production, trade, or temple duties. One especially intriguing tablet depicts a woman copying cuneiform, with a caption that loosely translates to "she excels at math." It's a tantalizing hint that girls might have had access to scribal training, though evidence is sparse. You watch as a young girl carefully carves numbers on a small clay tablet. Nearby, boys tackle similar problems, and the atmosphere is one of shared concentration rather than competition. While boys were typically groomed for official administrative roles, girls sometimes learned related skills within temple households or family workshops. Their education might have focused more on economic management or religious duties, but the math was just as real. Some scholars suggest that certain temples functioned as learning centers for women, where practical math, including beer ration calculations, was taught alongside rituals and crafts. One sassy tablet from a student, possibly female, playfully challenges a teacher's arithmetic, hinting at lively classroom dynamics. You say, 5 times 3 is 14? I disagree. It reads cheekily, though much remains uncertain. What's clear is that women's roles in Sumerian society were more complex than we often imagine, and math was a tool for empowerment as well as administration. You leave the room pondering how these ancient lessons echo in modern debates about education and equality. The school day winds down, but not before you're invited to join a small circle gathered around a well-worn tablet. A scribe with a mischievous grin challenges the group with a math riddle. Because even 4,000 years ago, humor and games helped make tedious calculations bearable. The riddle goes, if a brewer has 7 jugs of beer and gives half to his friend, then drinks one himself, how many jugs remain? The room murmurs with guesses, some correct, some wildly off. This playful math wasn't just entertainment. It sharpened mental agility and helped scribes think flexibly, skills essential when dividing unpredictable beer rations or adjusting for brewing losses. You watch as they puzzle over unit fractions, base, 60 numbers, and complex ratios, teasing out answers with patience and laughter. These riddles were part of tradition, an early example of how education blended seriousness with fun. Such tablets survive today, showing that behind the rigid structures of ancient math education lay vibrant minds eager to challenge and amuse. You realize that the scribe's love of puzzles isn't so different from modern math teachers' use of games to engage students. And so, through riddles about beer and barley, the legacy of ancient Sumerian math lives on, inviting you to join in the challenge. The sun is merciless as you find yourself sentenced to a seemingly endless chore, recopying multiplication tables on wet clay. The heat presses down and sweat trickles down your brow as you dip your stylus, carefully pressing wedge-shaped marks into the soft surface. This is no punishment for minor mistakes. It's the harsh reality of ancient scribal discipline, when errors in beer ration math meant you had to redo your work again and again until perfect. You glance around at other students, equally weary, their fingers cramped, faces flushed. There's a rhythm to the work. Stylus scratch, breath, press. The temple walls echo with the soft chorus of clay tapping. The teacher stands nearby, watching with the patience of a stone statue, ready to bark corrections or demand another tablet. You're learning the hard way that math in Sumer wasn't just knowledge, it was endurance. Historians still argue how strict these punishments were. Some think the double was a brutal place. Others believe it was firm but fair. Either way, the repetition drills drilled math deeply into young minds, ensuring scribes could calculate beer rations, taxes, and temple accounts flawlessly. Despite the heat and the monotony, there's a strange satisfaction in the tactile process. The feel of the stylus, the cool clay, the permanence of your marks. You wipe sweat from your eyes. Imagine the generations before you who sat where you sit, enduring the same lesson, shaping the future with each wedge. And somewhere in the distance, a faint murmur rises, a scribe's chant, a prayer, or maybe just a groan. The twilight deepens, and you find yourself tracing the long, winding legacy of Sumerian math. From those early clay tablets and beer rations, an astonishing chain of influence stretches across millennia and civilizations. The Babylonians inherited the base, 60 system, and refined it further, applying it not just to beer but to astronomy and geometry. Thanks to them, we have a 360-degree circle, a beautiful marriage of math and the stars, and yes, still echoing the ancient Sumerian knack for divisibility. Fast forward through time, and you see these concepts shaping Greek mathematics, influencing medieval scholars, and eventually seeping into modern science and engineering. Even your wristwatch is a tiny monument to these ancient scribes, counting seconds and minutes in 60s, without whom you might still be stuck counting on your fingers. Historians still debate the exact pathways of knowledge transmission and how much of modern math owes directly to Sumerian innovations versus later cultures. But the fingerprints are undeniable. As you look at the sky, the stars seem to wink knowingly, connecting you to those ancient nights when scribes counted barley and beer by candlelight. You marvel at how a society so distant and different laid the groundwork for our understanding of numbers, time, and measurement. And you realize with a soft smile that every sip of beer you take is a quiet toast to those first math teachers who taught through rations and reckoning. The day's bustle fades into stillness. Imagine the gentle crackle of a clay tablet cooling beside you, the faint scent of barley drifting in the night air. The math, once sharp and urgent, softens into a slow, steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of a world long gone but never forgotten. Feel the worn edges of history in your fingertips, the quiet dedication of scribes who carved knowledge into clay, not for fame or fortune, but to keep their communities alive and fair. Their numbers ripple through time, touching your life in subtle ways, a clock ticking, a glass raised, a lesson learned. Let your thoughts drift gently through these moments, embracing the imperfect beauty of human effort, the errors, the jokes, the triumphs inscribed in cuneiform. In this quiet, know that knowledge is a shared journey, passed hand to hand, tablet to tablet, generation to generation, as sleep wraps around you like a soft blanket. Let go of worries and count not sheep, but ancient seal of beer and the stars that watched over them. Good night.